And we're live.
All right, thank you. Welcome to the Creswell City Council work session for November 23rd, 2020. I will take roll call by name. Councilor Castilla is not with us at this moment, so he is unexcused at this time. Next will be Councilor Drago.
Councilor Drago here.
Councilor Inman.
Councilor Inman here.
Councilor Proccio.
Councilor Proccio here.
And Mayor Knutson is here. Next is the mayor's report. So I just wanted to read a brief statement to everybody. We're now in a statewide 2-week freeze per Governor Brown's orders. Restrictions have been put in place to slow the spread of COVID-19. I encourage all citizens to follow the guidelines and keep our community safe and healthy. We're going into the holiday season, and I know it's difficult to not spend this time with family and friends. I miss my loved ones and haven't seen them in over a year. I miss gathering in council chambers for our meetings and seeing you all face to face. But I support this freeze, and I hope it helps slow the spread of the virus. I have a cousin that's a nurse in Lane County, and she has been working in a hospital during this pandemic. She has had to isolate herself from her family and friends to limit their exposure. And I would like to share some words from her. If the numbers continue to rise in Lane County, then there may not be an ICU bed or a nurse to care for your loved one. Just think about the tough decisions that will have to be made. Triaging those we can save while not being able to treat and care for others. These are the tough decisions that hospitals and staff are having to make. So please continue to wear masks and face coverings while visiting Creswell businesses. Please support our local businesses. They need us now more than ever. Shop local and order takeout from our local restaurants. We can help each other through this difficult time. And that's all I have for the mayor report. Next is our committee reports. The Finance and Administration Committee has not met, so I don't have anything to report. Next is the Public Safety Committee, and that is Councilor Inman.
Thank you, Mayor. So the Public Safety Meeting Committee has also not met. However, we are looking to schedule our next meeting on December 3rd, which is a Thursday at 5:30. And that's it for that.
Thank you. Transportation and Public Works is Councilor Proccio.
All right. Yes, we had the opportunity to meet a couple of times, I think, since we last updated the council. And the first meeting, I think we did report on this before, that we had talked about and looked at the different types of funding options when it comes to transportation projects in Creswell. And then the next step, and what we went into the last meeting with the intent of doing, was looking at surveying folks and kind of gauging the public response as to where we're at with those different types of funding options. But the meeting took kind of an interesting but good turn as we kind of started to look at how it might be better to start first with some educational kind of outreach to the community about the different types of, not just the funding options that are out there, but the types of projects that we need to be potentially looking at. And I'll try to make it brief here, but I thought it was really good the way that the discussion went when we started to kind of approach how, what are those top priority projects? If we were going to look at those, say top 5 or 6, what exactly might we be looking at? And we know that a lot of times when people think about projects, they think, well, boy, that intersection up there, what they call the jog, which we know is as you approach Highway 99 from the north, coming south into Creswell, and you turn onto Oregon Avenue, and there's the railroad crossing, and then you turn left to go south again. There, they call that the jog. And everybody would say, well, I hate that intersection. But when you really actually look and approach things by the numbers of what it would cost to do that project, it's actually pretty amazing and pretty expensive. And it's also something that's not, there's a lot of dependencies, and one of those being that we don't own most of that, that's ODOT. So I think that really the conversation started to shift around more strategic thinking about what kind of projects that we might be able to do that might shift some of that load off of that particular area and make that safer by maybe having projects that take into account a larger picture. At least that's the way that I thought the discussion was going. And so I thought that what came out of that was that we would start looking at, first of all, what are those kinds of options? What can we do? What do we think might be the top priority ones? And when we talk about projects, we're kind of maybe talking about some of those larger projects. We know that we're always talking about things like improving an intersection or perhaps a crossing or something like that, or a sidewalk here and there. We're talking about those larger projects that will have potentially a bigger impact on Creswell. So those are the things that we're looking at. And so the next steps are to kind of figure what those are, and then to maybe start figuring out how that educational outreach.
Very good. Thank you. Sounds like Transportation and Public Works has a lot coming down the pipeline.
Good.
All right. So Airport Commission, and I see Alonzo, are you there? I see he's popped up.
Yeah, yes, I am. You have to excuse me. I was having some technical difficulties, but I'm here.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks for joining. It says Shelley Humble has the Airport Commission report. I don't know if that's accurate or if Alonzo's going to do it tonight.
I certainly can.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the last time we met was in January, so a lot has happened since then. So between the meeting and then I believe if you saw the emails that Michelle sends out, there was some snippets of information there as well. So I kind of combined the two. The taxiway project is complete, and when we met in October, it seemed like there was some details that still need to be buttoned up, but I'm assuming they're done now. It's 100% complete, and that was a 1 million grant funded project, which out of pocket for the city of Creswell was like $7,777. So that's just like really good news. And then again in January, we talked about some generators for the airport that would make it complete the EOC out there. And it didn't look like it was going to be funded. But at the October meeting, that is happening now. So that was really some good news. And it's like a $150,000 grant and 3 generators. I believe they may be working on them now, but I'm not sure because I saw the other email that Michelle put out. But regardless, that's going to make the airport a really nice, fully operational EOC in event of a disaster or something. It's really, really going to be nice. So, and then there was some discussion about future development, and there was a person looking to build hangars out there at the airport. And again, city staff has been talking with a possible business who's looking to relocate to the north end of the airport. And Shelley is working on getting water to that building and possibly a Ranco septic system, which is similar to what's out there now. And then Commissioner Mike Anderson gave a brief update on the STEM project out there. And like everybody else, due to COVID, they're shut down and restricted to remote learning. And it doesn't look like they're going to be starting that drone class up anytime soon. And then future projects. Shelley has completed 4 grants for the 2021 funding cycle, and they are to include the AIP match for the runway reconstruction, and resiliency grant to purchase a Defender XT with a blade and sweeper, and some phones and a Connex container, some more equipment for the airport, and a taxi lane design and construct in the new hangar development area and utilities to support taxi lane development. So also Shelley gave us an update on the SCIP, which is the State Capital Improvement Program, which is a long list of a lot of good things that are going to be happening out there in the airport. They go from 2021 to the phase 1 of the design and of the runway design and environmental, and then reconstruct the runway and lighting, which is the phase 2 of the construction project, and also pavement maintenance program, master plan, and a carryover, which I'm not sure what that is. So if Shelley can give you more information on that if she wants. And then to reconstruct the taxiway, which is be phase 1. This is all we're getting all the way down to 2026 now, and that would be the design and environmental as well. And then reconstruct the taxiway, which would be phase 2, which by 2026, 27, that airport out there is going to have so many improvements and stuff. And Shelley has been working pretty hard in getting all these projects and grants going. So, and that's about it. If Shelley, if you'd like to share more.
Thank you, Commissioner, Councilor Castillo. I would just add that we do have the $150,000 grant for the generators. We will be putting in 3 generators, one for the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, one at the electrical shack, which runs the runway lights and the pilot controlled lighting system, and then one for the main building that controls the fuel island and the lights and the communication. So we are working on that. I'm working on getting bids. So hopefully within the next month, we will have that project underway. We are 99% done with our taxi lane project. As Councilor Castillo said, it is over a $1 million project. It will end up, give or take a few dollars here and there. It'll be about $7,777. Which is pennies on the dollar. Partly it was less because of COVID-19. The FAA paid for all matching funds this year, so that was $222,000 we did not have to match. We're just doing paperwork now, and then we'll start working on the closeout. We're in the process of the CORE, the Critical Oregon Airport Revenue System, with the Oregon Department of Aviation. That is what I applied for 4 grants. We will hear back. We review them. We have until December 30th to review those grants because I'm on the ARC, which is Lane Act ARC review. We will go through those, and then in January we will rate them and prioritize those grants. So the one is definitely a pass-through. That is the AIP grant match for the runway construction, or I'm sorry, the runway design, which we will start working on in December. The other are either resiliency. We have one that is a resiliency grant that would be for the Defender. It's a 4-wheeler with a blade and a sweeper, so that if an emergency does happen, we are able to either clear debris off so that airplanes and helicopters can land, or we can sweep snow if we have a bad snowstorm like we did several years ago. So it will keep the airport operational. The other 2 are just hopeful. They are economic development. I'm not sure that we will be successful in those, but I am hoping that we are successful for the first 2. We had a Veterans Day here at the airport, which we had about 70 people. I think Michelle has her hand up. It was a good day. We were able to unveil the new flagpole that's at the EAA Memorial. And I think everybody that came had a good time. And I can answer any questions if you have any.
Sounds like lots of exciting things going on at the airport as well. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I think that's Michelle's feedback. All right. Thank you, Shelley and Alonzo. Moving on to the Lane Act report, and that would be Councilor Inman and Maddie Phillips.
Thank you. So Lane Act did meet in October and actually twice in November for an area strategy workshop. And that was an interesting process to, we had to list 5 things looking out to the year 2040. So 20 years out, and it was really an interesting process. There was facilitators on what each group came up with and kind of a combination. So that was interesting. Maddie, did you want to add anything about that?
Sure, Councilor Inman. I think the big picture is that the ODOT is working with 2 different area commissions on transportation to develop what they're calling an area strategies. I guess you could call it a strategic plan. You could call it kind of a big picture look at the different regions, but essentially there's been a lot of discussion about what role the Act plays in prioritizing projects. And I think that where they'd like to start, where ODOT is starting, is getting a sense of where our region's values and goal areas are. And then from there, this is an ongoing process that Misty, Councilor Inman, and I will listen to and participate in over the next year. So you'll hear a bit more about it.
Perfect.
Very
Thank you
good.
for adding that, Maddie.
All right. Anything else, Misty?
We have a next meeting scheduled in December.
Okay.
And that's it at this time. Yeah.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you. For presentations, we don't have anything tonight, so we'll move on to the discussion items. Item A is Lane County Policy and Procedures for Large Public Gatherings and Demonstrations. And we do have Sergeant Denham here to go over the materials that were in our packet.
I don't know how much you want to talk about. It's pretty self-explanatory as far as what our response would be. We can't really, every scenario is different, so we can plan for having things on the ground or try to get adequate people based on the intelligence that we have or past gatherings. But outside of that, we kind of have to coordinate things as we're seeing things develop, which is kind of how our most recent did. I guess if you have questions regarding those particular steps, I would say ask. And either myself or Lieutenant Mann would be able to answer.
Okay. I think my thought process around this was we've never seen a policy or procedure. We had a big gathering in our city. It seemed to go over fine. Nobody was hurt. People, you all responded, OSP responded as needed, and it seemed to work itself out just fine. But I wanted to be prepared, and I wanted to just have a little bit of background information on how you operate your policies and procedures, and just so we have that information going forward. So I will open it up to questions and comments. I believe Councilor Prochi was first, and then Councilor Inman. You gotta unmute. Wait, you gotta unmute.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you. So it's around the part, the question that I have is around the deploying of gas, because there's a lot of questions these days about tear gas versus other types of things. And so I thought maybe you could help us understand how that works.
You want to take that one?
Yeah, I can try try to answer that one. That's pretty serious use of force. This incident that happened that we were talking about earlier, that all we basically did was observe and then communicate with some of the people involved and the leaders. Tear gas out in a crowd situation is something that the sheriff's office doesn't even do. We have the capabilities, but I can't even remember the last time that was used. It would have been over 20 years ago, probably. So we would, it would be a large scale event. There would be a lot of resources here, and you would use that. It just really depends on the situation. The crowd that was violent and very criminal activity, assaults, major property damage. More than likely, it would not be just a tear gas deal, but potentially less lethal munitions and targeted enforcement actions to try to get a handle on whatever that problem was going. We used some munitions this summer at the jail when the jail was literally attacked by a really hostile group. But those, there was no tear gas used in that. It was pepper irritants and direct munitions that are used at specific people, as opposed to trying to clear out a whole area. Even in that situation, it's not like we threw canisters of tear gas and tried to move the whole crowd away from the jail, if that makes sense. It's very targeted action against the people that are actually doing the damage to the facility.
And there would usually be quite a few admonishments of unlawful assembly, announcements, and dispersals. So moving to that would be a follow on to people just not adhering or obeying those commands.
The use of gas, like in the incident that we talked about earlier, that would be so far advanced. It wasn't even considered on that. It was just an observation and make sure that we don't have individuals assaulting each other and that kind of thing. That we never even thought about the potential of having to use gas on something like that. That's just not going to happen.
And I think the reason that I was asking that question is that I've seen in some instances where some cities have said, no, we're not going to ever use tear gas, that's completely out of the scope of possibility. But it sounds to me like that's not the case in Lane County, that it could be an option if the circumstance demanded it.
Yeah, there's nothing that specifically takes it off the table. Okay. We haven't. But what would come into play is the decision to do something like that's a command level decision. Hopefully we don't get to that spot. Hopefully things will settle down. I can tell you that we use tear gas in residences on these armed barricade deals where, for whatever reason, we can't go away, we're mandated to make an arrest, or there's a major safety concern to the neighbors. Basically what I'm saying is you can't walk away from this call and you've got somebody in there that's committed a crime. We will, and we do, I don't know, I wouldn't say frequently, but occasionally use tear gas, because there's three ways you can get somebody out of that house. You can talk them out, which is usually what happens, and that's the way we like to do it. You can force them out, where the tear gas comes in, or you can go in and get them. And when you go in and get them, that's when you get the face-to-face danger of a potentially armed confrontation at face-to-face distances. So it's a really important tool to us on some of these rural individual barricades, and that's where our most experience with gas is, at those kind of calls.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I guess a follow-up question I had regarding tear gas. It says only certified members may deploy chemical agents. So who in Creswell is a certified member?
Anybody on the special response team, and you've got, how many do you have right now? One down here, but we would get the right personnel in.
Okay.
And like the decision to use tear gas on a crowd thing, that would be something that's built up. It wouldn't be a snap decision. There was warning and a very, very methodical use of it if we ever got to that spot. Like I said, I can't remember in the last 20 years the sheriff's office using it in a crowd deal. When I first started, there was some munitions like that being used on some protests down in Eugene where we were assisting the city, and some of that stuff was used.
And there's going to be quite a bit of communication that starts much earlier than it even before that even develops into something. Take this event here, the command was being notified and spoken to as early as we found out that the larger group was coming down here, and things were going to possibly have a lot more people coming into town. That's when those notifications and discussions were starting to happen. So that's the level early on in those in any of these events. Command's going to be involved and quite possibly be on scene relatively quickly, so that's being directed from everything from the sergeant level up through the captain level and possibly the sheriff.
And every one of these situations is so different. Like this summer, a lot of things that would happen would be like maybe a potential threat to the jail, or there would be a group that was going to do something, and there's an opportunity to kind of pay attention to what's going on in social media and then make a decision. Are we going to have some extra people in case there's a problem, and you just try to work through it. Like this thing that happened, it was so spontaneous from a rally in Springfield that suddenly moves to Cresswell. There was no real intel on that until they just showed up.
Right. All right, Councilor Inman, did you have a question?
I did. My other question, because thank you, Councilor Prochu, that was one of my two questions, was what is considered, like, rough number-wise, a crowd? I know it might depend on the type of activity or level it is, because I wasn't there for our downtown event. So is there a certain level of, could it be 5 people? Could it be 20 people?
It really could be. I mean, if you'd have a major incident with 5 people if they went and blocked the freeway. You just sat on the freeway and went without getting ran over and got it to a stop. So it's really the behavior that's going to dictate what happens. And I mean, all of these are so unique. They're all different for us, potentially.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Castilla or Drago, do you have any questions or comments? Councilor Castilla?
Yes, just one, maybe just for just to get a little more knowledge on this. I said the first one, I went down and I observed for a while, and it wasn't nothing compared to the second one. And there was a few, kind of along how Councilor Inman, when does it become a crowd? The first one, there wasn't very many people, wasn't that big of a deal. Second one, it seemed to become a crowd really quick, and the sidewalks were blocked really fast, and then kind of spewed out to the street a little bit there in the parking area. Now, when is the call there to say, hey, are they not supposed to block the sidewalk? What is the deal with that?
It's very difficult to control blocking the sidewalk once the group grows to a certain size. The only thing that we can do on the planning positions with that is to take whatever was going on at the last gathering. So this was actually the third of that particular group. The first time it was around 40, 50 people that almost blocked the sidewalk just as much as the larger group did the third time. The second time was a little bit larger, but not much, and it was relatively benign. There were a few people from one side that showed up and then a larger group from the other. So the only intel we have to go on, especially the way that the two sides organized their events, was to play off of those sides. So while with one group I kind of expected close to the size that they had, we didn't expect certain things that they did. But with the other group, we had not enough intelligence because things were being done a little bit more covertly without us being able to watch it. And as late as late Friday night, because I worked graveyard that night, we still had no intel other than what we were seeing on social media as far as shares and things like that. And so things were being done a little bit more under the radar within that particular group to get the call out to people to come down here and to join them from within the community. So like I said, it's all, a lot of it's reactionary. You have to see what's happening on the ground, and then basically we had our deputies, and we had a couple of deputies that lived close that were on call to come in if they were needed, which did happen. And then from there, it's the rest of what we have on patrol, which, as you know, is not a lot.
Well, and then the personnel cost, yeah, even when we do know that there's going to be some kind of event or a protest, we got to be pretty measured about, we don't want to call in 20, 25 guys and have nothing for them to do. We'd rather save that money and have them out working a rural patrol. And you definitely got to be, we had to learn to try to be very disciplined and really think through how we're going to protect the courthouse, protect the jail, those kind of things. This last summer, we got a little bit of experience in that. So.
And we do, basically, we have to watch how the crowd is behaving. If they're on the sidewalk, are they allowing someone with a wheelchair or someone that needs to get down the sidewalk at that particular time, partying away and allowing them to get through? Are they physically trying to block people from going? And whether or not traffic flow is being completely blocked off, or if it's, even if it spills into the roadway, if the traffic flow is still being parted to let cars go through, then we kind of step back and just keep an eye on it and keep admonishing people to stay out of the street, which in earlier communications before some of the news events and other things like that were happening, both of my deputies were on the phone with me and giving me updates on admonishing people and talking to people and whether or not people were ignoring them or not ignoring them. And the big thing is, one, traffic flow east to west on Oregon Avenue is a major thoroughfare, whereas traffic onto First Street, as long as people are able to get off Oregon Avenue and people are parting the way, then we can deal with that and keep trying to push people back. But it's very difficult for having only the one or the very few people we have go into a group and try to make an arrest for somebody, or even pull somebody out to go write a citation, because that takes that person out of that unless it's absolutely necessary. If it becomes more assaultive and things like that, then we're dealing with that type of issue. But as it grew, they're very difficult to start singling people out. One of the big things is to make sure that Oregon Avenue stays open.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I feel satisfied with what you guys have presented to us. I feel like my questions have been answered, and I feel a little bit more knowledgeable about what's going on and how you guys handle things. Of course, we don't want to see any destruction in our city. We don't want to see any violence and anybody getting hurt. And I feel like you guys are on that same page as well. So hopefully people will protest peacefully going forward, and we can still honor their First Amendment right to protest and gather. But certainly I don't want our deputies to be put in danger. I don't want our citizens to be put in danger, or our businesses. So.
Yep. And we have sent one case forward to the DA based on one complaint that came in. That'd be actually the only criminal type complaint that came in. So that'll be up to the DA's office to determine what they're going to do with that. So that's basically the result that came out of it.
Okay, very good. Thank you, guys.
Mhm.
All right, moving on to the draft downtown plan, and that's Ms. Phillips.
Good evening, councilors. Thank you for the opportunity to bring forward a document that's been a long time in the making. Like everything, there have been stops and starts, and it's good to actually have a document in one's hands ready for you to read and to talk about. So thanks for your patience on that. I'll start off by kind of dovetailing or just briefly covering some of the things that I spoke with you about in August at your work session. You'll recall that there was a short memo I provided you regarding some of the core areas that the downtown plan would cover. And you all provided some great feedback. I appreciate that time, and I hope that you see that some of that is incorporated into this document that you have in your hands. Just to start, the downtown plan is exactly what it sounds like. It's a plan that looks at our downtown commercial area. You'll see a map of that area early in the document in the existing conditions section. Runs from A Street to D Street and Front Street to 3rd Street. And remember also that this, what you have before you will eventually become part of the city's comprehensive plan. And we refer to those documents as refinement plans, because typically we'll take an area and not just look at one aspect of it, but look at all of the different elements that are incorporated in this one particular area to produce what we hope would be the best possible design or function of that zone for the city's growth. So this, remember, will be a refinement plan of that downtown area covering a series of different topics. And just for quick history, the first downtown plan for Crestwell was written in 2001, and it helped the city access grant funding to design and build Oregon Avenue. So you'll see those bulb outs and the wider sidewalks. Prior to this, if you look at historic photos of Oregon Avenue, we had lots of angled parking. It was designed essentially for big Cadillacs and cruiser vehicles to pull in and, you know, glimmer in the sunshine, and was certainly a relic of its age. The design you see today is a little bit more focused on the pedestrian experience, providing a lot of that space instead of for the big hoods of an Eldorado. Instead, we're hoping to walk side by side with our children, or push a stroller, or walk with an elderly friend or neighbor of ours. And then in 2009, the city actually did do a refinement of the downtown plan, which focused primarily, was done by a rare participant who was an AmeriCorps volunteer for the city, and it focused on primarily an inventory of businesses in downtown, and kind of looking at a very early version of what could be called a sector analysis, describing and looking at the different mixtures or multipliers of different industries that were located in the city. This document kind of comes back to the original 2001 plan, and it's largely as a result of the city making a lot of progress in designing, developing, and building areas throughout this downtown area that we actually have made a lot of strides in. You'll remember over the last 3 years, we've adopted as a city a transportation system plan, and we've also looked at our housing needs. And both of those elements, I can point to directly and say that those prompted our efforts around focusing on the downtown area as a core component of those two bigger picture documents. So you'll see early in the document, there's a section that starts on page 11, which describes the vision statement for the Crestwell Downtown Plan. And in fact, this is the same vision statement that was developed in 2001. Early on in this process, and I'll kind of give you a little, I'll pepper in some details, but you'll remember from our August conversation that there was a downtown team formed. Thank you, counselors who participated in that. It was very valuable and very helpful to staff and to the other members of the team for your participation. And that vision statement states that downtown Creswell will enhance our residents' quality of life by providing an economically viable and attractive business community served by safe and efficient transportation options while maintaining the city's historic small town and friendly atmosphere. Now, there's nothing about that I think we could argue differently. Perhaps we could get down to the wordsmithing, but it sure is a really great vision statement. So with the help of the downtown team and some work that we did, we were intending to do something more in person. I won't wax poetic about the refrain of due to COVID-19, but essentially we pivoted, did some survey work instead. You'll see both of the summaries of those two outreach efforts included in the appendices, A and B. You'll also remember there was a downtown open house, an interactive tool that displayed a lot of the street designs and some of the other elements and asked folks for their feedback. All of that's been incorporated into this document. So where this document focuses most are on 6 objectives. And you'll see the 6 objectives listed throughout the pages from 12 to 26, but just for summary's sake, the first one focuses on investment and beautification with an emphasis on facade improvement and continuous active storefronts. The second is the utilization of the right-of-way. Objective 2 focuses a lot on the work that was done that started with the transportation system plan, but now bridges into a lot more detail about how might those design ideas apply to each type of street. You'll see a street map in the beginning of the document that shows each of the different street classifications. Those classifications take into account future capacity needs of those roads. So capacity often includes trips made by cars, but also people walking on sidewalks, bicycles passing through, and it describes the relationship of the pieces of the road. I think we'd call it, us planners have a term that's called streetscape. Whether you choose to use that term or not, it's up to you. But it describes the design elements that make a space friendly or usable for each of those different users. And the streetscape that we imagine in 2020 is quite a bit different than perhaps 2000, and even different yet than what we imagined back in the 60s. So you'll see a focus on that in Objective 2. In Objective 3, there are a series of statements around mixed uses and commercial, neighborhood commercial, high density residential. This pulls in a lot of the work that we did around housing needs, specifically focusing on opportunities to increase housing opportunities above commercial uses, as well as focusing on what types of mixed uses might best suit our lively, vibrant downtown in the future. Part 4 is looking at distinct design, so particularly around windows, doorways, access points. Objective 4, full disclosure, actually captures quite a bit of our existing development code around the downtown zone. So these are, it will appear to be the most detailed of the document, and that's because most of the material is already part of our existing code. It's very similar to how we've done other comprehensive plan amendments in recent past. This is capturing a lot of that and providing a basis for it, purpose statements and where we would draw reinforcement from. If someone said, well, I would like to do something totally different, this is what I propose, we would come back to the comprehensive plan and the downtown plan itself and speak to the greater vision for this area. Objective 5 focuses on attractive public spaces. Many of my colleagues who focus more on architecture or design would tell you that those public spaces are what make downtowns unique, and they serve as the heart of a lot of places. Think about major architectural buildings with really notable architecture. They often have big plazas or public squares or something to that effect. We don't have that big public space, but we certainly utilize areas around our public buildings in a similar way. So these are public spaces that we hope will be attractive and welcoming to people who would like to visit them. And finally, adequate parking. There's a lot of discussion about parking. One of my favorite professors in school used to tell me it all comes down to parking. And as much as I would like for that not to be true, it must be addressed, because that's how we get around, and that's how folks use our commercial areas in particular. So this was a big topic that's covered in Objective 6. That's a very high level view. You'll remember that the 5 areas that we did a lot of engagement around downtown plan members, you'll remember streetscape, there's that word again, housing in downtown, wayfinding, civic buildings, and parking were those 5 topic areas that we asked a lot of questions about. Before I move on to some of the document itself, are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to offer?
I have some if nobody's going to go first. So Objective 4 talks about, what is it? The building orientation, the streetscape. I guess it's all about the buildings. A lot of our language is encourage building owners, encourage this, the building materials to be something, encourage building modifications. And I just wonder if we could have a little bit more teeth in that as far as legislative mandatory things in our code that says you must. So then we can get away from relying on encouragement and hoping, and more you must. And certainly, I mean, I look at a prime example of this as Sisters, which all their facades are, 1800s Western, they have to be wooden and blah, 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 blah. And certainly that's not Cresswell, and that's not what I'm proposing. But is there a way to make sure that our buildings are more up to code, more a vision, whatever that vision is, more uniform or more eclectic? Do we want crazy colors? Is that what we're looking for? I guess I would like more discussion as we go forward, obviously, around that, and what our citizens, what our businesses want. I mean, there's a lot of businesses down there. What do they want? What kind of facade would they like to see their neighbors have, and what they want to have? And then what can we do to mandate that? Because we're the policy-making body, so we have the control to add ordinances and add code and to enforce things that our business owners and our citizens want to see. If that makes sense.
Point taken, Mayor Knudsen. In fact, you're spot on when it comes to operationalizing how we implement the ideas that are in this document. And truth is that the encouragement statements are primarily a policy function in order to create requirements that limit, say, the building materials that a building can be built of in the downtown zone. In fact, luckily enough, it did not come to me during my tenure, but just prior to my tenure, a person wanted to build a metal building in downtown. Metal buildings are often utilized in commercial areas, or I'm sorry, in industrial areas, and tend not to be as consistent with downtown design styles. To the chagrin of that developer, because of a statement that says you shall use or shall not use materials inconsistent with the following, that person did not end up building their building. So that's
So it
to
does
say
work.
that's to say that there is a point taken about adding a lot more strength to the policy statements, but also that this document will provide the basis for a level of policy. You'll get another crack at some of these items because I'll bring back to you some development code language that comes right out of this. That says this is how we're going to annotate or amend our development code. And these are the developer shall provide
Right.
kind of areas. So if there is an area in particular, so for example, just to pick one out, encourage transom windows or clerestory windows above doorways. That's a really typical or popular way to meet the window requirement. So we have a window requirement. It says you shall provide 50% of the facade must be windows, which is challenging sometimes if you don't intend for your office to have giant picture windows in the front. So folks use that tool, transom windows or clerestory windows, to achieve that standard. They must meet the standard. However, we would encourage them to use that tool.
Right.
So
just-
if there are areas in particular, I'd love to strengthen areas that you feel particular about.
I just want to be respectful and want to do what our business owners downtown, that they have to live it, they have to conduct their business. And so what they're saying in part of the survey is they want beautification of amenities was ranked as the highest. So they want to see something down there that increases, I'm guessing, their foot traffic, increases their business, increases everything. And so I want to be respectful of what they want and then put policies in place so that when builders come, they can adhere to that and not build a metal building or an all concrete building with no windows. You know, there's things definitely that you know more about that draws business and that makes our downtown more attractive. And so I just want to be mindful of that as we go forward and make sure that we as counselors are doing the work to support this document and support our businesses. I think that's all I had for that part.
Thank you, Mayor. One area just to kind of dovetail or provide a little bit more information to your comment. Getting down to the section about amenities, about pedestrian amenities. That is one area, and in a moment I'll share my screen so that you can see some of the comments that the Planning Commission amended and added. The version you have in front of you went out the same time as the Planning Commission packet, just by timing of their meeting and yours. So I do have a couple elements to add or areas where there were some refinements, and I'll put those up on the screen in a moment. But for example, pedestrian amenities in section 4.4, there is now an effort, because of the comments and ranking by the business owners, as you mentioned, to include additional human scale amenities. So things like decorative lighting, planters, hanging baskets, plaza areas, special paving, public art, sitting spaces. These will all be part of requirements when a development occurs in downtown, that for every certain amount of square feet that they add in floor area, they will also be required to provide some kind of amenity that adds to that street environment. Just to cite a similar example. Other questions before I put up a document and you stare at a bunch of red lines and green highlights? Nope. Okay. I'll go ahead and share this. I just thought I'd walk through and explain a couple of the comments that the Planning Commission provided. Again, they kind of follow our Planning Commission chair, Jessica Lanstra, and also our vice chair, Susan Bennett, both participated also in the downtown plan with Mayor Knudsen. And they were able to kind of provide a little bit more detailed comment because of their involvement with the TSP and the housing work. So let me put up on the screen the document that you have, and you'll see that there are just a couple changes refinements that the Planning Commission provided. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. There are a couple areas where, first and foremost, we have a downtown street cross section that you'll see there. One of the elements that Cliff Blue, our Public Works Director, helped to add some refinement to, where you see, if I can use a little, I wonder if can you guys see my mouse? Probably not.
Yes.
Where you see the little
We can see your mouse.
Length, great. This will generally be a 2-foot wide strip, basically an overall 8-foot wide sidewalk curb to building. So anticipate that. That's with a caveat to say that where there is constraint, like for example, existing buildings prevent us from utilizing the whole 60 feet of the right-of-way. The right-of-way in downtown, by the way, each street is 60 feet wide. It's not being utilized like that, but each street, the city owns 30 feet on, center of road to the other side. So we will likely be utilizing 8 feet as a basis, but where there are constraints, we might see some variability in that decorative strip. The decorative strip is more or less an area where light poles, street trees, planters, benches, wayfinding signage, all of these things are typically found in that area. In Figure 3, you'll see a note here that our engineer is working to revise this drawing to show something that looks a lot more like A Street as it's been developed today, with bulb out corners, so the radii of these road intersections will be a lot wider. You'll see markings to mark the crosswalks, and you'll also see these planters. This will all be concrete filled in between the light posts and the trees to give a more urban downtown feel. There was a whole section missing, my apologies, about 8th Street and North 2nd Street, talking about the transition between the downtown zone, and you'll see this actually built out in your neighborhood right now. Bulb out corners for the A Street south, where the zone is downtown commercial, assuming that those will all be commercial storefronts at some point in the future. A Street North is a residential neighborhood and will retain its park strips, a little strip of grass and street trees, and the design of a more residential street design. There's that bulb out on A Street. Looking good, Cliff. And added Sharrow. This is a marking, if you're unfamiliar with Sharrows, just indicating on roadways that aren't required to have a dedicated bicycle lane, reminding vehicle users that there are typically bikes, and where there are bikes are allowed to take the lane. And that's reflective not only of the space that's allotted to users, but also the speed at which travel is expected. So Sharrows typically happen or are implemented on roads that are a slower speed. There were some concerns, rightfully so, with our engineer's suggestion of putting a bike lane behind an angled parking spot. I was speaking today about this with Michelle Amberg, and we talked a little bit about the dangers of people pulling out of their parking space and not being able to see that cyclist in the bike lane. So we'll likely remove the area that says optional 60 60-degree angled parking with bike lane. We will, however, retain the angled parking option based on some feedback that we got from business owners who operate in downtown, that they'd like to have opportunity to provide more parking spaces immediately in front of their store. To install angled parking dimensionally will require a right-of-way dedication, meaning part of their frontage will have to be dedicated for use as the road, whereas the sidewalk and then some of the parking space. That's an option for new development that builds on properties that have a pretty substantial setback already. For those businesses that want to locate in existing buildings, it would be very, very difficult to install angled parking because of how much real estate it takes up widthwise in the road. One really kind of innovative strategy that we talked about at the downtown team level and also with participants as they responded in the survey work was that there's a hope that the ground floor of most of the buildings in downtown would serve some kind of commercial purpose, in particular because of the activity that commercial uses in the ground floor provide. If you're a pedestrian walking down the street and you see storefront and another storefront, another storefront, you're much more likely to enter those buildings and visit those stores. Whereas if storefronts are interrupted by private residences, or it kind of starts to feel more like a neighborhood and less like a commercial district, people tend not to pass by those in order to achieve another active stretch of storefronts. We call those kind of dead zones or lower activity areas. So the Planning Commission and others that participated, as I mentioned, all indicated, and maybe it's hard to see in this figure, and I'll do a better job of highlighting the text, but you'll see that these green areas, so areas that between A Street and about mid-block on B Street, they said those are areas that if someone wants to build a purely residential building, that's an option, you know, to have frontage onto a street that's not Oregon Avenue in particular, would be amenable or would be more tolerable than having a purely residential building be built on Oregon Avenue fronting that commercial street. So that's part of, that'll be a little tricky for me. In fact, I think I wrote it up and I got it about 75% right in the development code right now. Those code changes that you did back in April helped to enhance opportunities for residential uses above ground floor commercial. And then they also said you may build a purely residential building. However, to do so, you have to achieve a minimum density, meaning you have to provide a certain number of units per acre. This will provide a little bit of geographic refinement to that description, saying if you want to build a purely residential building, we welcome it in downtown because it's so close to services and businesses inherently build customer base that way. However, we'd like to see those buildings face or front roadways that are not Oregon Avenue. And that's essentially what Figure 8 describes. The Planning Commission dug in a little bit more into infill strategies in section 4.3, where there's been lots of discussion at the Planning Commission level about how do we transition existing properties, existing single-family homes into commercially viable properties in this future downtown vision that we have. Their suggestions have focused primarily on if you want to expand or enhance a property, a house existing, they would like to see the building meet the street. So utilizing more of the front setback area for an addition or some kind of plaza or patio or display area, rather than seeing those buildings be added onto in the rear, for example. They want basically bringing the reason why we have such a short or small setback in the front in downtown areas is that the buildings actually define part of the pedestrian space. they give you a sense of security, not only between the doorways and the curb line, but also kind of frame that area in a lot of different ways. Places that have bigger setbacks, that pedestrian area isn't as well defined, and sometimes it's not as well utilized. One of the things that the Planning Commission has discussed, and I've been shopping around with some colleagues to try to figure out how we do this, is to essentially require that ground floor spaces, whether they're intended to be used immediately as commercial space or won't be used as commercial space until some point in the future. Some might refer to this as like a live work unit, where right now it's being utilized as a part of someone's house, but in the future it could be used as an office space out front and have residential uses primarily above or behind that space. They really want to see us dig in more to requiring commercial standards for that ground floor space that meets the street. I'll have to get back to you with some more details about what I find related to that. I've shopped it around to a couple of planner colleagues of mine, and so far we've come up with a couple examples, but it might be a little bit out there. Next, in terms of pedestrian amenities, just speaking to Mayor Knudson's comments, part of the crux of designing roadways so that people will use them is providing not only elements at a scale that people can use them, so lights that are less than 20 feet tall, hanging baskets, awnings over doorways and entries, enhanced crossing treatments, sitting spaces. These are all what we call pedestrian amenities. And one thing that you'll see this number come up again, so I feel like as if it's good to explain. Farmlands Market, for example, is 2,400 square feet. And we were talking at one point about 4,000 square feet being a good size to use as a measurement, but in fact, Planning Commission felt that we should really reduce that number to 2,500 square feet. That if you're going to build a building that's bigger than the Farmlands Market, that you ought to install a bench or a light or a trash can or something that helps define the front streetscape of your building. Buildings that get even larger will be required to install additional features. And this assures that the city doesn't see a huge development of what could be a very lovely building, but missing all of those pieces that help make the street area a more welcoming place to enter and exit that building. So they said, we've got to take it down from 4,000 to 2,500. So that was one of the things that's different than the document you have before you. In Objective 5, we got some feedback that where possible, we'd really like to see undergrounding of utilities. There's a pretty significant discussion about how overhead lines are a little bit volatile in the sense that they get obstructions blown into them during storms and sometimes knocks the power out. This could be the power that serves a lot of the city because of the nature of how our connections are made. Also, with street trees and the encouragement of installing street trees, trees interfere with overhead lines, and then the trees get cut and they look kind of funny sometimes, although I will say our public works staff does an excellent job of making those trees that would normally want to grow a lot taller look really nice growing a little shorter. At some point you'll see, in other communities where they'll cut, a whole half of a tree off because they've got wires running underneath it. Anyhow, we'd like to avoid that as much as possible. Getting into bicycle parking, oh, excuse me, I missed one. Again, that 2,500 square foot discussion getting into parking. I'll start by saying the overall vision for downtown is some form of net zero parking, meaning we try to add back where we have to take away due to design improvements like modernizing the roadway. modernizing our roads and building them with sidewalks, curb and gutter, rather than having just the paved width that's 25 feet, will add a lot of parking spaces as we do those projects. However, there will be times like adding bulb outs and areas, certain parts of the streetscape that will take away parking spaces. Those parking spaces we'd like to be able to preserve as much as possible. So when looking at parking, you'll remember my comment back in August. I did go out and count all the parking spaces in downtown. We have 344 spaces in Crestwell's downtown zone. Those are not counting off-street parking, so not counting lots that are off the roadway. Those are only spaces in the road. So right now, if you were to mark out every parking space in downtown, we have 344 of them. I think what folks often perceive as a parking problem is really maybe a business's success in attracting enough people that want to come visit that shop, and they may not be as familiar with where parking can be found. So they all swarm the one intersection or the one small undeveloped intersection in this case of two roads that don't have parking defined and kind of have a mishmash of where you can fit a car in. And sometimes when you do that, you block someone's mailbox or you block a stop sign, and the rest ensues. So one of the things that we'd really, aside from modernizing the roadway and making those parallel parking spaces accessible, is looking at perhaps right now there is no minimum parking standard for development in downtown Crestwell. There's a lot of concern that now that we've expanded opportunities for residential development, in particular, that parking could become a problem. There are some solutions that are longer term, like establishing convenient parking lots that could be publicly owned or not around the perimeter of the downtown zone as it develops. Another option is including some kind of parking standard for what a developer wants to build. And we've wrestled with this. You can listen to the Planning Commission's discussion if you're keen. But a quick summary is that they believed that 2,500 square feet, if you have a building or development that's that small, that basically that parking can be absorbed. But once we get above 2,500 square feet for each individual or discrete business, there ought to be some kind of parking standard. And I think what Planning Commission and even the downtown team seemed amenable to was looking at half of what the typical use requirement would be in our other zones. So in low density residential or in general commercial, taking those parking standards and cutting them in half and saying, basically you get a credit for your first 2,500 square feet. Let's say you had a 3,500 square foot development. You had 1,000 more square feet of office, just to pick an example. Office space typically requires 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet, and in downtown you'd be required to provide 1. So that gives you some context. The same thing would be true of a residential development. If you had a 2-bedroom apartment, and a typical 2-bedroom apartment would require 1.5 spaces, someone gets half a car. In fact, we typically round up in those cases. Then you'd be required to provide 3/4 of a parking space for a 2-bedroom apartment, assuming that you're living downtown. Maybe you're more apt to use a car less, and it's likely that you're taking your car away during the day when businesses need those parking spaces, and then you're coming back in the evening and parking your car overnight. Most of our businesses aren't open late in the evening, so perhaps that could be a compatible shared use of those spaces. Just as a kind of an additional option that the Planning Commission also threw in was that if you have existing spaces along the frontage of your building, so let's say you're at a corner and you have 2 frontages, so you've got probably 4 spaces, you can count those adjacent spaces towards your minimum requirement. So if you're blessed with a large facade, you might have to install more pedestrian amenities, but you'd get to count your parking spaces. So when you work it out, it's for smaller scale commercial development and smaller, higher density residential development, it works out really well because you'll essentially have on average probably a 2 to 3 space parking requirement total. And those spaces could be street spaces, but they could also be off street spaces. And then of course there's even another layer of parking where you can create a parking agreement with someone who owns private parking spaces and commit certain parking real estate to your development. So we tried to give a lot of options, but essentially said, if and when our downtown development is so successful that we have so many buildings and uses that need people to come and park there, that we have at least some alleviation valve to require on-site spaces that can help mitigate that kind of impact regarding parking. And then finally, we have there was one very creative suggestion in the Planning Commission group. The Planning Commissioners, one of them is a bicycle advocate, and he talked about some kind of very advanced parking device that allowed bicyclists to be elevated off of the ground while parked. Not saying that that's the right direction for Crestwell's bicycle parking, but essentially saying that if there is something that's really smart that comes about in the next 20 years or so that we'd like to offer as a bicycle parking option, it would be good to have room for that rather than being bound to the typical inverse U-shaped hoops. And I've taken up far too much time, so I'll open it up to questions and comments as you would like to offer them.
Thank you, Maddie. Does anybody have any questions, comments regarding our draft downtown plan? Oh, come on, this is exciting stuff, guys.
Yeah, my only comment is that it looks great. I like everything that I see. I like the way the direction is going about putting a little more teeth into holding that beautification up, and it seems like I was really glad to see that 70%. It sounds like that's what that's what our citizens want, and it just looks great. Thank you guys for all your hard work.
All right, I think Councillor Prochu has his hand up.
Yeah, kind of similar comments. I get excited when I look at this stuff. I know that other people may wonder what that really means, but to me, it means that we've got some concrete ideas and plans about how we're going to revitalize Crestwell and the downtown area. And the parking spaces to me is interesting, and you kind of sort of answered the question that I had, which was around maybe the dynamic uses of parking spaces. And I was kind of trying to even think about how some of the restaurants have needed to use spaces for like quick takeout, kind of handing food out to people or things like that. And I kind of want to make sure that we can still provide that kind of dynamic use of parking spaces. And maybe, and then I guess the other question I had is, are there any impacts on any of these ideas that impact our events that we have, especially like the 4th of July?
Good point, Councillor Prochu. I had not factored in events except to encourage them. But in fact, you're correct. That's a very large part of our community's use of the space, however seasonally. And in fact, there are likely some policy statements we could make in this document that could speak to the ability to utilize all of the roadway to close roads or to create spaces even for other events. Like I know in Eugene, there's an event that closes certain stretches of roadway for people to use. They call it Sunday Streets. It would be a similar activity to some of our, on a much smaller scale than say 4th of July, but for parades, for events, and maybe speak to that specifically. I know our Veterans Day celebrations have typically taken place in the roadway. These are all factors that we ought to include in the document. So I'd happily encourage, or an amendment somewhere that says speaks to those events in particular. In light of the parking utilization of parking spaces in front of a business for some kind of perhaps temporary use, or maybe even in the future, we talked a little bit. In fact, I'll confess, we have a planning commissioner who's a parking specialist. He works at the city of Eugene and manages parking. So we have quite a bit of knowledge in our midst when talking about that, Commissioner Gehring. And he brought up early that parking would inherently be a big part of this design or this vision because of how people use space and how they access the downtown. And we did talk at one point about, where along this timeline might it be relevant to talk about parking management, limited duration spaces, for example, quick stop spaces, I think is what I would describe your comment as, Councillor Prochu, like 15-minute or 30-minute parking areas that are restricted for loading or for in this case, unloading materials into someone's car or into someone's vehicle kind of thing. And perhaps there is something that we could add to the parking section and the objectives or strategies rather that speaks to temporary or short duration parking.
Cool, thank you, Maddie.
Anybody else? Yeah, I often wondered about that because Eugene closes off Broadway now for certain hours in order to accommodate all the businesses and all the takeouts and all the restaurants there. Certainly during lockdowns and COVID, when takeout's only available, the few restaurants that we have that are right there on Oregon Avenue, that is a busy place to pull in and out of, but then also to find parking. If there's some sort of language we could have for a temporary permit they could apply for. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure the parking specialist would have better ideas around this. The 15-minute parking only, anything to encourage spaces left open in front of businesses that need it. So people don't have to park far away in order to get to that business that's strictly doing takeout. And I mean, honestly, we're not going to have strictly takeout for years to come, but in a temporary situation that we've been in our temporary situation's been 9 months now. So it would have been nice to have some sort of plan of action, something to offer our businesses to help. So maybe some sort of language around that going forward to encourage that, or to have options for them.
The point is very well founded, councillors. We have an application type called temporary use permits. Temporary uses typically are things like that take place on private property, where someone wants to temporarily for the day accommodate an event. Let's say a good example of this is Blue Valley Bistro. For many years had their annual celebration of their, marking the number of years that they've been open, and they'd set up a stage and kind of serve outside and have this big kind of fun party event. And they'd apply every year for a temporary use permit. But again, that's on property that's outside of the right of way. And where we've kind of worked out a couple different ways, special event permits that take place in the right of way. So they close roads, for example, But maybe there's grounds for what I'm hearing you describe as a temporary use permit, that kind of a spontaneous sidewalk cafe or some kind of event that takes place that blocks a half of a block or a roadway or part of a sidewalk for a limited duration of time.
Right.
And that could be something that morphs into something more useful or utilitarian, like a drop-off site, but more optimistically could also be a special party event for a particular business downtown.
Right.
And that's something maybe Cliff or Michelle might have a comment or a suggestion around that we can work out and incorporate into the final draft.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much, Maddie.
Thank you, counselors. It's been a pleasure to put this together. It's a lot of fun to do work like this that's multidisciplinary, that touches a lot of different areas of planning and city visioning. And thank you to all 173 people who responded to the survey, who tuned in to our planning commission meetings when we talked about it, and especially to the downtown team members who dedicated their time and energy about a year ago to help kind of craft the direction of this project.
Thank you so much. All right, and I think that is the end, people, unless anybody has anything else to add. Come back for more fun on December 14th at our next city council meeting, maybe the last one of the year. Until then, see you guys next time.